Bikers kidnapped a black boy, unaware that Keanu Reeves was watching them. What happened next was a real lesson for them. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the empty highway. The rumble of a motorcycle echoed through the quiet air as Keanu Reeves rode steadily down the desolate road. His black leather jacket was streaked with dust from the miles he'd traveled, but his posture remained relaxed, his hands steady on the handlebars. The rhythmic purr of the engine was a familiar comfort, a companion on these solitary journeys. Ahead, he spotted a lone gas station nestled against the backdrop of a dry, sprawling landscape. Its faded sign swayed gently in the breeze, the paint peeling from years of neglect. The place looked like a relic from another era, barely holding on in a world that had moved on. Keanu slowed his bike and pulled into the station, the tires crunching over loose gravel. He swung off the motorcycle with practiced ease, taking a moment to stretch and look around. The air was still, heavy with the scent of gasoline and distant sagebrush. Keanu ran a hand through his wind-tossed hair and grabbed the fuel pump. As the gas flowed into the tank, he scanned the surroundings. The station was deserted, save for a rusty pickup truck parked near the small convenience store. His attention was drawn to the faint sound of voices coming from the other side of the lot. He turned and saw a group of men, 5 of them dressed in leather jackets and worn jeans, standing in a semicircle. In the center of their group was a young boy, no older than 6. The boy's small frame seemed to shrink under their towering presence. He clutched a faded backpack to his chest, his wide, frightened eyes darting between the men. Keanu's brow furrowed. Something about the scene felt wrong. The men were laughing, their voices rough and mocking. The boy stood frozen, as if rooted to the spot by fear. Keanu finished filling his tank, set the pump back in place, and walked toward them. His boots crunched on the gravel, the sound carrying in the stillness. The laughter ceased as the men noticed him approaching. Their expressions shifted from amusement to annoyance, their postures bristling with unspoken defiance. "Hey," Keanu said calmly, his voice steady but firm, "leave the kid alone." One of the men, the apparent leader of the group, stepped forward. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a cocky smirk. His jacket bore the emblem of a local biker gang. He looked Keanu up and down, his smirk widening. "Mind your business, old man," the leader sneered. "This doesn't concern you." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "I said, let him go." The other bikers exchanged glances, chuckling. One of them, a wiry man with a snake tattoo winding up his neck, nudged the leader. "Looks like we've got ourselves a hero." Keanu ignored their taunts, his focus on the boy. The kid's knuckles were white as he gripped his backpack, tears brimming in his eyes. Keanu took a step closer, but before he could say another word, the leader turned and barked an order. One of the bikers, a burly man with a shaved head, stepped toward Keanu's motorcycle. With deliberate malice, the man kicked the bike's mirror, shattering it. The sound of breaking glass cut through the air and Keanu's jaw tightened. The bikers laughed, their voices echoing in the empty lot. "Oops," the bald man said mockingly. "Guess I slipped." Keanu's eyes darkened, but he didn't move. The bikers misinterpreted his restraint as weakness, their laughter growing louder. The leader turned back to the boy, grabbing him roughly by the arm. The kid let out a small yelp, which only seemed to amuse them further. "You've got 2 choices, hero," the leader said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Walk away and save yourself some trouble, or stick around and see what happens when people don't mind their business." Before Keanu could respond, the bikers made their move. One of them lifted the boy off the ground and slung him over his shoulder like a sack of grain. The boy struggled, kicking and crying, but the man held him firmly. "Let him go!" Keanu's voice was sharp, cutting through the din of their laughter. The leader smirked one last time before turning to his crew. "Let's ride, boys." They mounted their motorcycles, the engines roaring to life. Gravel sprayed as they sped off, the boys' cries fading into the distance. Keanu stood motionless for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. His motorcycle stood nearby, its damaged mirror dangling by a thread. As the dust settled and silence returned, Keanu took a deep breath. His face was unreadable, but his mind was racing. He crouched beside his bike, inspecting the damage. The mirror was beyond saving, but the rest of the machine seemed intact. He straightened up, his expression hardening. He couldn't just stand by and let this happen. The boy's terrified face was burned into his memory, a silent plea for help. Keanu adjusted his jacket, swung his leg over the seat, and started the engine. The motorcycle roared to life, the sound echoing across the barren landscape. He turned the throttle, the machine responding with a growl. With one last glance at the empty gas station, Keanu took off down the road, following the trail left by the bikers. The hunt had begun. The wind howled as Keanu rode through the desolate landscape, the fading sun painting the horizon in hues of orange and crimson. His focus was razor-sharp, his mind replaying the events at the gas station. The image of the terrified boy haunted him, fueling his determination. The bikers had a head start, but they left a clear trail, a plume of dust in the distance, tire marks on the dry road, and the faint rumble of engines that occasionally broke through the silence. Keanu leaned forward, urging his motorcycle to go faster. The familiar hum of the engine was a comfort, a reminder of control in a situation that felt chaotic. He scanned the terrain, his sharp eyes picking up signs of the gang's route. A broken beer bottle glinted in the dirt near the roadside, and further ahead, a discarded soda can marked their careless path. After about 20 minutes of hard riding, he saw them. The bikers were a dark cluster against the vast expanse of desert, their motorcycles kicking up a trail of dust as they veered off the main road and onto a narrower, more rugged path. Keanu slowed slightly, maintaining his distance to avoid detection. He needed to time this carefully. The path led to a rocky outcrop where the bikers finally stopped. Keanu parked his motorcycle behind a ridge and climbed a short incline on foot to get a better view. From his vantage point, he could see the gang gathered near a makeshift fire pit. Their motorcycles were parked in a loose circle, and the boy was tied to a post, his small frame illuminated by the flickering firelight. He wasn't crying anymore, but his shoulders were hunched and his head hung low. The gang was laughing, passing around bottles of beer. They seemed relaxed, their guard down. Keanu's gaze shifted to the leader, who was gesturing animatedly, clearly reveling in his perceived victory. The others cheered, their voices carrying through the still air. Keanu assessed the situation. 5 men, all of them larger and likely stronger than him, but their arrogance was a weakness he could exploit. He had no weapons beyond his wits and the environment around him, but that had always been enough. He took a deep breath and moved silently down the ridge, his boots barely making a sound on the rocky terrain. The shadows cast by the firelight worked in his favor, concealing his approach. He crept closer until he was just outside the circle of light. He could hear their conversation now, crude jokes, plans for what they'd do with the boy, and laughter that grated on his nerves. Keanu stepped into the light, his presence abrupt and commanding. The laughter stopped instantly. The bikers turned to face him, their expressions shifting from surprise to irritation. The leader stood, his beer bottle dangling loosely in one hand. "Well, well," the leader drawled, a smirk creeping across his face. "Looks like our friend couldn't take a hint." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "Let the boy go." The leader laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. He turned to his crew. "You hear that? He thinks he can tell us what to do." One of the bikers, the wiry man with the snake tattoo, took a step forward. "You must be either brave or stupid to come after us alone." Keanu ignored him, his focus remaining on the leader. "This doesn't have to get ugly. Let him go, and we all walk away." The leader's smirk widened. "You really think you can take us on? 5 against 1? You're out of your league, old man." Keanu didn't respond. He stood perfectly still, his stance calm but ready. The firelight flickered on his face, highlighting the resolve in his eyes. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Finally, the leader's smirk faded. He gestured to one of his men. "Teach him a lesson." The burly biker with the shaved head stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. He was a wall of muscle, his expression twisted with anticipation. He lunged at Keanu, aiming a powerful punch. Keanu sidestepped smoothly, grabbing the man's arm and using his momentum to send him crashing to the ground. The man let out a pained grunt, clutching his shoulder. The other bikers froze for a moment, stunned by how quickly their comrade had been taken down. Then chaos erupted. 2 of them charged at once, but Keanu was faster. He ducked under a swinging fist and delivered a sharp elbow to one man's ribs, then pivoted and swept the legs out from under the other. The wiry man with the snake tattoo pulled out a knife, his movements fast and calculated. He slashed at Keanu, who dodged with precision. Keanu grabbed a nearby metal pipe lying on the ground and used it to deflect the next strike. The clanging sound echoed in the night as the 2 exchanged blows. Finally, Keanu disarmed the man with a well-timed strike, sending the knife skittering across the dirt. The leader, realizing his men were outmatched, pulled a chain from his belt and swung it menacingly. "You're dead, you hear me?" Keanu didn't respond. He focused on the chain's movement, waiting for the right moment. When the leader swung, Keanu caught the chain with the pipe and yanked it hard, pulling the man off balance. A swift kick to the chest sent him sprawling. The remaining biker hesitated, his confidence clearly shaken. He looked at his fallen comrades and then at Keanu, who stood tall and unyielding. Without a word, the man dropped his weapon and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Keanu turned to the boy, who was staring at him with wide eyes. His hands were still tied, but his expression had shifted from fear to awe. Keanu knelt and untied the ropes, his movements gentle. "You're safe now," he said quietly. The boy nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Keanu stood and looked around. The leader and his gang were groaning on the ground, too injured to move but still conscious. Keanu grabbed the leader by the collar and pulled him close. "If I ever see you near him again," he said, his voice cold and unwavering, "you won't get a second chance." He let the man fall back into the dirt and turned to the boy. "Let's get you out of here." Keanu picked up the boy's backpack and led him toward his motorcycle. The fire crackled behind them, casting long shadows as they walked away. The confrontation was over, but Keanu knew this was just the beginning of their journey. The moon had risen high in the sky, bathing the barren landscape in a cold, silvery light. The boy sat quietly on the back of Keanu's motorcycle, his small hands clutching the edges of the seat for balance. His face was streaked with dirt, and his wide eyes reflected exhaustion and lingering fear. Keanu rode in silence, his mind replaying the events at the campsite. The confrontation had been brief but intense, and though he'd prevailed, he knew the bikers wouldn't give up easily. As they approached a small roadside rest area, Keanu slowed the bike and parked under the shade of an old, twisted tree. He turned off the engine, and the sudden silence was almost deafening after the constant roar of the motorcycle. He glanced back at the boy, who was trembling slightly despite the warmth of the night. "You okay?" Keanu asked, his voice gentle. The boy nodded but didn't speak. He slid off the bike, clutching his backpack tightly. Keanu grabbed a bottle of water from his saddlebag and handed it to him. The boy hesitated before taking it, his small hands shaking as he unscrewed the cap. "Drink," Keanu said. "You need to stay hydrated." The boy took a few tentative sips, his eyes darting around the dark landscape as if expecting the bikers to emerge from the shadows at any moment. Keanu crouched beside him, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the boy's posture. "What's your name?" Keanu asked. "Tyler," the boy mumbled, barely audible. Keanu nodded. "Okay, Tyler. Do you know where your parents are?" Tyler's eyes welled up with tears, and he shook his head. I don't know. I was walking home from school, and those men, they grabbed me." Keanu's jaw tightened. The anger he'd suppressed earlier threatened to resurface, but he pushed it down. Tyler needed reassurance, not more fear. "We'll find them," Keanu said firmly, "but first, I need to make sure you're safe." Tyler looked up at him, his expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. Are they going to come back?" Keanu glanced toward the horizon, where the faint glow of the biker's fire was still visible in the distance. "They might try," he admitted, "but they won't touch you again. I promise." He stood and began checking his motorcycle for any signs of damage. The confrontation had left a few scuffs and a bent handlebar, but the bike was still functional. As he worked, he thought about their next move. Dropping Tyler off at the nearest police station seemed like the obvious choice, but something told him it wouldn't be that simple. The bikers had targeted the boy for a reason, and until he knew why, Tyler wouldn't be safe. Keanu's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a distant engine. He froze, listening intently. Tyler heard it too and clutched his backpack tighter, his face pale with fear. "Get behind the tree," Keanu said, his tone calm but urgent. Tyler obeyed without question, scrambling to hide behind the thick trunk. Keanu reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wrench, improvised but sturdy enough to serve as a weapon if necessary. He positioned himself near the bike, ready to act. The sound grew louder, and soon a single motorcycle came into view. It wasn't one of the gang's bikes. This one was smaller, with a bright headlight that cut through the darkness. The riders slowed as they approached the rest area, eventually stopping a few yards away. "Hey there," the rider called out, their voice cautious but friendly. "Need some help?" Keanu relaxed slightly, lowering the wrench. The rider was a young woman, her face partially obscured by a helmet. She removed it, revealing short tousled hair and sharp eyes that scanned the scene. She noticed the bike, the tree, and the shadow of Tyler peeking out from behind it. "Looks like you've had a rough night," she said, nodding towards the scuffs on Keanu's motorcycle. "What happened?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He studied her, trying to gauge her intentions. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were alert, taking in every detail. Finally, he spoke. "Ran into some trouble," he said simply. "We're fine now." The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Trouble like the kind that leaves a kid hiding behind a tree?" Tyler stepped out hesitantly, clutching his backpack like a shield. The woman's expression softened when she saw him. "Hey there, kid. You okay?" Tyler nodded but stayed close to Keanu. The woman dismounted her bike and took a step closer. "Name's Grace. I'm heading into the next town. Figured I'd stop and see if you needed anything." Keanu considered her offer. She seemed genuine, but his instincts told him to stay cautious. "Appreciate it, Grace, but we've got it handled." Grace shrugged, though her eyes lingered on Tyler. "Suit yourself. But if you're dealing with what I think you are, you're going to need more than a wrench." Keanu's expression didn't change, but her words struck a chord. "What do you think we're dealing with?" Grace glanced around, her tone dropping. "There's been talk. A gang running kids through this area, snatch and grab jobs mostly, sometimes worse." Keanu's fist clenched. Grace noticed but didn't comment. Instead, she stepped back toward her bike. "You seem like the kind who can handle himself, but if you need backup, look for me in the next town. Place called Harper's Rest. I'll be at the diner." With that, she started her engine and rode off, leaving Keanu and Tyler alone again. Keanu turned to Tyler. The boy looked up at him, his fear mixed with a glimmer of trust. "We're not just running anymore," Keanu said, his voice steady. "We're going to figure out why they took you, and we're going to stop them." Tyler nodded slowly, his small hands tightening their grip on his backpack. Keanu mounted his motorcycle, motioning for Tyler to climb on behind him. As the boy settled in, Keanu glanced toward the horizon, where the faint glow of Harper's Rest beckoned. The road ahead was uncertain, but Keanu knew one thing: this was far from over. The moon hung high in the star-dappled sky as Keanu and Tyler rode into the night, the distant glow of Harper's Rest their only guide. The air was cooler now, crisp and sharp against their faces as the motorcycle sped down the winding road. Keanu's mind was focused, every sound and movement scrutinized for signs of pursuit. Tyler sat quietly behind him, his small hands clutching Keanu's jacket for security. The calm didn't last long. A sudden roar shattered the silence, a familiar, menacing sound. Engines, several of them. Keanu glanced in his side mirror and saw headlights in the distance, a row of glowing orbs bouncing against the uneven terrain. The bikers had regrouped, and they were closing in fast. "Hold on tight, Tyler," Keanu called over his shoulder, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. Tyler didn't need to be told twice. His grip tightened as Keanu leaned forward, opening the throttle. The motorcycle surged ahead, its engine roaring as they raced down the narrow road. The lights behind them grew brighter, the bikers gaining ground with each passing second. The road twisted and turned, its edges flanked by rocky cliffs on one side and a steep drop-off on the other. Keanu navigated the curves with precision, but the gang was relentless, their engines growling like a pack of wolves on the hunt. The first attack came swiftly. One of the bikers, a burly man with a jagged scar across his cheek, pulled alongside them. He brandished a chain, swinging it menacingly as he closed the gap. Keanu veered sharply to the right, forcing the biker to adjust his path and momentarily lose momentum. Another biker tried a different approach, riding up behind them and attempting to ram their rear wheel. Keanu felt the jolt as their bikes collided, the impact reverberating through his body. He glanced back, his sharp eyes locking onto the attacker. With a sudden brake-check maneuver, Keanu caused the biker to swerve, nearly losing control. The gang was undeterred. Their leader, still bearing the bruises from their earlier encounter, shouted commands to his crew. They spread out, attempting to box Keanu in from all sides. Keanu spotted an opportunity. Ahead, the road split into two paths, one paved and well lit, the other a narrow dirt trail that disappeared into the darkness. Without hesitation, he veered onto the dirt trail, the bike jolting as it hit the uneven terrain. Tyler gasped but held on, his face buried in Keanu's back. The bikers hesitated briefly before following. The trail was rough, littered with rocks and debris, and their heavier bikes struggled to maintain speed. Keanu used the terrain to his advantage, weaving through the obstacles with practiced ease. One of the bikers wasn't so lucky. As he attempted to close the gap, his front wheel hit a large rock, sending him flying off his bike. The man tumbled across the ground, his curses lost in the roar of engines. Keanu glanced back, taking stock of their dwindling numbers. 3 bikers remained, their determination unshaken. The leader was among them, his expression a mask of rage. The trail widened into an open field, its surface dotted with tall grass and scattered boulders. Keanu pushed the motorcycle harder, the engine straining as they raced across the uneven ground. The bikers were close behind, their headlights casting erratic beams through the darkness. Suddenly, Keanu spotted a fallen tree ahead, its massive trunk blocking the trail. He had seconds to react. With a sharp turn, he guided the bike toward a small ramp-like incline formed by the uneven ground. The motorcycle launched into the air, clearing the tree with inches to spare before landing with a bone-jarring thud. The bikers weren't as fortunate. The first one tried to follow but misjudged the jump, slamming into the tree and flipping over his handlebars. The second swerved at the last moment, losing control and skidding into a ditch. That left the leader. His bike roared as he pushed it to its limits, the machine straining against the uneven terrain. Keanu could see him in his mirror, his face twisted with fury and determination. The open field gave way to another narrow trail, this one flanked by dense trees that cast long shadows in the moonlight. Keanu knew he had to end this chase before it reached Harper's Rest. He couldn't risk leading the gang into a populated area. As they sped down the trail, Keanu spotted an overhanging branch just ahead, its thick trunk forming a low arch across the path. An idea formed in his mind. He slowed slightly, allowing the leader to close the gap. When the timing was right, Keanu leaned low over the handlebars and passed under the branch with inches to spare. The leader, focused solely on his prey, didn't see it in time. The branch struck him square in the chest, sending him flying off his bike and into the underbrush. The leader's motorcycle skidded to a halt, its engine sputtering before falling silent. Keanu didn't stop to check the aftermath. He pressed on, the roar of his engine the only sound in the night. When they finally reached the outskirts of Harper's Rest, Keanu slowed the bike and pulled off the road, parking under a cluster of trees. He killed the engine, and the sudden quiet was almost deafening. Tyler slid off the bike, his legs trembling as he tried to stand. "Are you okay?" Keanu asked, his voice soft but firm. Tyler nodded, though his hands were still shaking. You got them." Keanu crouched to meet the boy's gaze. "For now, but we need to stay sharp. They won't give up that easily." Tyler's eyes widened. What if they come back? Keanu placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "If they do, we'll be ready." As they walked towards the distant lights of Harper's Rest, Keanu's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. The bikers had shown their hand, but there was still so much he didn't know. Why had they taken Tyler? And who was behind it all? One thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The warm glow of Harper's Rest greeted them as they approached, its flickering neon signs and dim street lights standing in stark contrast to the darkness they'd left behind. Keanu guided the motorcycle into a secluded alley just off the main strip, shutting off the engine to avoid drawing attention. Tyler slid off the bike, his small frame visibly tense as his eyes darted around the unfamiliar surroundings. Keanu crouched to meet the boy's gaze, his voice calm and steady. "We're safe for now, but we need to find out why they're after you. Do you remember anything at all, that might explain it?" Tyler hesitated, his hands gripping the straps of his backpack tightly. I don't know," he said softly. "They just grabbed me after school. I didn't even see them coming." Keanu studied the boy's face, searching for clues in his expression. There was fear, yes, but also something else, a flicker of uncertainty, as if Tyler wasn't telling the whole story. Keanu decided not to press him. Trust would come in time. "All right," Keanu said, standing up. "Let's find some answers." He led Tyler down the alley and onto the main street, where a few late-night diners and motels were still open. The town was quiet, its streets nearly empty except for the occasional passing car. Keanu's gaze swept over the buildings, finally landing on a small diner with a bright, buzzing sign that read, "Harper's Haven." Inside, he spotted Grace sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. She noticed them the moment they entered, her sharp eyes narrowing as they approached. "Took you long enough," she said, setting her mug down. "I figured you might show up here." Keanu slid into the booth opposite her, motioning for Tyler to do the same. The boy hesitated before climbing onto the seat, his small frame almost swallowed by the oversized leather upholstery. Grace leaned forward, her voice low but pointed. "So, what's the story? That kid yours?" Keanu shook his head. "No, but he's in trouble and I'm trying to help." Grace's eyes shifted to Tyler, who was fidgeting nervously. "What kind of trouble?" Keanu hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Biker gang grabbed him off the street. They've been chasing us ever since." Grace let out a low whistle. "Sounds like the Copper Vultures. They've been stirring up trouble around here for months. Kidnapping kids, running smuggling operations, you name it. The cops can't, or won't, do a damn thing about it." Tyler's grip on his backpack tightened, his knuckles turning white. Keanu noticed but didn't comment. "You know where they're based?" Keanu asked, his tone direct. Grace smirked. "Funny you should ask. I might have heard a thing or two, but it's not the kind of place you just walk into and ask for directions." Keanu's expression didn't change. "I don't plan on asking." Grace studied him for a moment, then sighed. "There's an old warehouse on the edge of town, near the train yard. They've been using it as a hideout. You'll probably find more than just bikers there, though. They've got connections, people who won't take kindly to you poking around." Keanu nodded. "Thanks." Grace leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "You really planning to take them on? Just you?" Keanu didn't answer. He stood and motioned for Tyler to follow. Grace watched them go, shaking her head. "You're either brave or stupid," she muttered under her breath. Back outside, Keanu led Tyler back to the motorcycle. The boy hesitated, looking up at him with wide eyes. Are we going to that warehouse?" Keanu knelt in front of him, his expression serious but calm. "I need to find out why they took you, Tyler. If we don't stop them, they'll keep coming." Tyler's lower lip trembled, but he nodded. "Okay." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I need you to stay hidden. It's too dangerous for you to come with me." Tyler opened his mouth to protest, but Keanu cut him off. There's a motel down the street. I'll get you a room, and you stay there until I come back. Understand?" Reluctantly, Tyler nodded again. Keanu led him to the motel and paid for a room, making sure the boy was safely inside before heading out. Tyler watched him go, his small figure framed in the window as Keanu disappeared into the night. The ride to the warehouse was uneventful, the quiet streets giving way to the industrial outskirts of town. The building loomed ahead, its metal siding rusted and graffiti covered. Dim lights flickered in the windows, and the distant hum of engines confirmed that the gang was inside. Keanu parked his motorcycle a safe distance away and approached on foot, moving silently through the shadows. As he neared the building, he could hear voices, loud and brash, punctuated by bursts of laughter. The gang was celebrating, unaware of the storm heading their way. Keanu slipped around the side of the warehouse, finding a stack of crates that gave him a clear view of the interior through a broken window. Inside, he saw a dozen bikers, including their leader, who was nursing a bandaged arm from their earlier encounter. In the corner, a row of cages held several children, their frightened faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights. Keanu's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about Tyler anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. He scanned the room, taking note of exits, weapons, and potential obstacles. The gang was armed, but they were careless, their overconfidence making them sloppy. Keanu knew he had to act fast and strike hard. Retreating to a safe distance, he formulated a plan. The odds were against him, but that had never stopped him before. Tonight, the copper vultures would learn what happens when they mess with the wrong man. The warehouse loomed in the stillness of the night, a shadowy monolith against the faint glow of the distant town. Keanu crouched behind a stack of rusted barrels, his sharp eyes scanning the perimeter. The voices from inside the building grew louder, laughter and muffled music mixing with the occasional clink of bottles. The copper vultures were celebrating something, their arrogance palpable even from outside. Keanu's gaze shifted to the row of cages he had seen through the broken window. The children inside huddled close together, their faces pale and filled with fear. The sight fueled his resolve. Tonight, he wasn't leaving until they were free. He moved silently around the back of the warehouse, keeping to the shadows. His years of experience in high-pressure situations had taught him how to blend into the darkness, how to anticipate his enemies' moves before they made them. As he neared the rear entrance, he noticed a single guard leaning against a wall, smoking a cigarette. The man's attention was elsewhere, his posture relaxed. Keanu waited for the right moment. When the guard turned to exhale a puff of smoke, Keanu moved in swiftly. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back, and clamped a hand over his mouth. The guard struggled briefly, but Keanu's grip was unrelenting. A quick, precise strike to the side of the neck rendered the man unconscious. Keanu eased him to the ground and dragged him into the shadows, securing his hands and feet with a length of cord he had brought with him. The door was unlocked, creaking softly as Keanu pushed it open. He slipped inside, his steps light and deliberate. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of oil and sweat. The main area of the warehouse was a chaotic mess of scattered tools, crates, and motorcycles in various states of disrepair. The gang was clustered around a large table near the center of the room, oblivious to his presence. Keanu's eyes darted to the cages. The children were watching the gang with wide, terrified eyes, their small hands clutching the bars. He needed to get them out, but he couldn't risk alerting the bikers until the kids were safe. He crept toward the cages, sticking to the shadows cast by the towering stacks of crates. One of the children, A girl with curly hair and a tear-streaked face noticed him. Keanu pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. The girl nodded, her movements almost imperceptible. The lock on the cages was old and rusted. Keanu pulled out a small multi-tool from his pocket and began working on the first lock. His hands moved quickly but carefully, the sound of the gang's raucous laughter masking the faint clicks of metal. After what felt like an eternity, the lock popped open. He eased the door open and whispered to the children inside, "Stay quiet and follow me, one at a time." The children hesitated, their fear paralyzing them. Keanu's voice softened, steady and reassuring. "I'll get you out of here, I promise." One by one, the children climbed out of the cage. Keanu led them to a corner of the warehouse where they would be hidden from view. He turned back to free the others, his movements swift and precise. Just as he unlocked the second cage, a loud crash echoed through the room. One of the children had accidentally knocked over a wrench, the clanging sound cutting through the noise like a gunshot. The gang fell silent. Chairs scraped against the floor as the bikers stood, their eyes scanning the room. The leader, his face still bruised from their earlier encounter, grabbed a crowbar from the table and barked an order. "Spread out. Find whoever's here." Keanu's heart raced, but his mind remained clear. He ushered the remaining children toward the others, his voice low, "Stay hidden. Don't move until I say." He slipped back into the shadows, his body tense and ready. The bikers spread out, their heavy boots thudding against the concrete floor. Keanu waited, watching as they moved further apart, their confidence working against them. The first biker to approach Keanu's position didn't see him until it was too late. Keanu stepped out of the shadows, his movements fluid and precise. A swift strike to the knee followed by a chop to the throat sent the man crumpling to the ground. Keanu caught him before he could fall, easing him down silently. The second biker rounded a corner, his flashlight sweeping the area. Keanu used a nearby chain as an improvised weapon, wrapping it around the man's arm and disarming him before delivering a knockout punch. The commotion drew the attention of the others. The leader shouted, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "Come out, you coward!" Keanu didn't respond. He moved through the maze of crates and machinery, picking off the bikers one by one. Each encounter was calculated, every move deliberate. The gang's numbers dwindled, their confidence eroding with each fallen comrade. Finally, it was just the leader. He stood in the center of the room, his crowbar held tightly in both hands. His eyes darted around the shadows, his bravado replaced by a flicker of fear. "You think you can take us down? You don't know who you're messing with," he shouted. Keanu stepped into the light, his expression calm and unyielding. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." The leader lunged, swinging the crowbar with brute force. Keanu sidestepped effortlessly, his movements smooth and controlled. He grabbed a nearby wrench and used it to deflect the next blow, the sound of clashing metal ringing through the air. The fight was brutal and fast. The leader was strong, but his anger made him sloppy. Keanu anticipated his moves, countering with precision. A final, well-placed strike sent the crowbar flying from the leader's hands. Keanu grabbed him by the collar, his voice cold and commanding. "You're done. This ends now." The leader struggled, but Keanu's grip was unrelenting. He dragged the man to the center of the room and left him there, bound and defeated. Turning back to the children, Keanu motioned for them to follow him. "It's over," he said, his voice steady. "Let's get you home." As the children filed out of the warehouse, Keanu glanced back at the leader. The man glared at him, his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," he spat. Keanu didn't respond. He led the children into the night, their small, hesitant steps growing steadier with each passing moment. For the first time in hours, they felt safe. But Keanu knew this wasn't the end. The Copper Vultures weren't just a gang. They were part of something bigger. And he was ready to face whatever came next. The night air was cool and quiet as Keanu led the children away from the warehouse. The sound of their footsteps was muffled by the dirt path, and their frightened whispers blended with the rustle of the trees. Keanu's senses were on high alert, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of pursuit. The Copper Vultures might be momentarily incapacitated, but he knew better than to assume they were out of the picture entirely. The children moved in a small cluster behind him, their faces pale and eyes wide. Some clung to one another, their fear still fresh, while others simply followed silently, their heads bowed. Tyler walked close to Keanu, his small hand gripping the edge of the older man's jacket. He looked up at Keanu with a mixture of trust and exhaustion, his earlier anxiety replaced by a flicker of hope. Keanu paused at the edge of the clearing, crouching low and motioning for the children to do the same. Ahead lay the main road, its asphalt faintly visible in the moonlight. The faint hum of distant traffic was the only sound. He turned to the children, his voice a low whisper. "Stay here. Don't move until I come back. Understand?" The children nodded, their movements slow and uncertain. Keanu's gaze lingered on them for a moment longer before he stepped onto the road, his footsteps silent. He approached the tree line cautiously, staying low to avoid detection. From his position, he could see the distant glow of Harper's Rest. Safety was within reach, but the path was still fraught with danger. As he scanned the road, Keanu's thoughts raced. The children were safe for now, but the Copper Vultures wouldn't stay down for long. Their leader's parting words echoed in his mind, a warning laced with malice. Whatever this gang was involved in, it was bigger than a single warehouse or a handful of kidnappings. Satisfied that the road was clear, Keanu returned to the children. He gestured for them to follow, his voice steady. "We're almost there. Stay close and stay quiet." The group moved quickly but cautiously, their small footsteps barely audible on the dirt path. Keanu took the lead, his every sense tuned to the possibility of an ambush. The children followed in single file, their fear giving way to determination. As they reached the outskirts of Harper's Rest, Keanu led them to a small motel on the edge of town. The building was run down but quiet, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the still air. He guided the children to the rear entrance where they could remain out of sight. Inside, the night manager looked up from his desk, startled by the sudden appearance of the group. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of Keanu and the children, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Can I help you?" the man asked hesitantly. Keanu stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "These kids need a place to stay for the night. I'll cover the cost." The manager hesitated, glancing at the children. "What's going on here? Are they—" Keanu cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "They're safe now, but they need rest. Can you help or not?" The man nodded quickly, grabbing a set of keys from the wall behind him. "Room 3. It's got enough space for all of them." Keanu thanked him and led the children to the room, opening the door and ushering them inside. The space was small but clean, with 2 twin beds and a worn-out couch. The children huddled together on the floor, their exhaustion finally catching up to them. Tyler looked up at Keanu, his voice barely above a whisper. what's going to happen now. Keanu crouched beside him, his gaze steady. "You're safe here. I'll make sure no one hurts you." Tyler's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, his small hand reaching out to grasp Keanu's. "Thank you." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder before standing. He turned to the rest of the children, his voice calm but commanding. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me. I'll be back soon." The children nodded, their trust in him evident. Keanu stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind him. He stood for a moment, his mind racing. The children were safe for now, but the copper vultures weren't finished. He needed to ensure they couldn't hurt anyone else. As he walked toward his motorcycle, Keanu felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the fight wasn't over yet. He started the engine, its low rumble cutting through the silence, and rode into the night, determined to finish what he had started. The first rays of dawn broke over the horizon as Keanu's motorcycle rumbled down the quiet streets of Harper's Rest. The town was just beginning to stir, shop owners unlocking doors, delivery trucks making their rounds. But Keanu's thoughts were far from the morning calm. His mind lingered on the events of the night before. The faces of the children etched into his memory, their fear and relief mingling in their wide eyes. He parked outside the police station, a squat, unassuming building with a faded sign and a single patrol car in the lot. Keanu dismounted, brushing the dust off his jacket, and walked inside. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of stale coffee. Behind the front desk sat a weary-looking officer, his uniform rumpled and his attention focused on the paperwork in front of him. The officer glanced up as Keanu approached. "Can I help you?" Keanu placed both hands on the counter, his voice calm but firm. "I've got information about the copper vultures. You're going to want to hear this." The officer frowned, his skepticism clear. "The vultures? What about them?" "They're running a kidnapping operation out of the warehouse near the train yard," Keanu said. "I've already freed their latest victims, a dozen kids. They're safe, but the gang is still out there." The officer's eyes widened, and he leaned forward, his tone sharp. "You're saying you took on the vultures by yourself?" Keanu didn't answer directly. "The kids are staying at the Harper's Rest Motel, room 3. They need protection and a way home." The officer hesitated for a moment before picking up the phone and dialing. He spoke quickly, relaying Keanu's information to someone on the other end of the line. When he hung up, he looked back at Keanu, his expression a mix of disbelief and respect. "We'll send units to the motel and the warehouse," the officer said. "But if what you're saying is true, this is going to bring a lot of heat down on this town." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. Better the heat than letting them keep hurting people. The officer nodded slowly. "You're right. Thanks for stepping in. Most people wouldn't have." Keanu didn't respond. He turned and walked out of the station, the door swinging shut behind him. He mounted his motorcycle and sat for a moment, his hands resting on the handlebars as he watched the town come to life. The weight of the night's events lingered, but there was a sense of closure, too. As he started the engine, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from Grace. "Grace, saw some of the cops heading your way. Guess you pulled it off. Stay safe, hero." Keanu smiled faintly, tucking the phone away. He owed Grace a thanks, but there would be time for that later. For now, his focus was on the road ahead. He returned to the motel to check on the children. When he arrived, a group of officers was already there, speaking gently to the kids and taking statements. Tyler spotted Keanu and broke into a run, throwing his arms around him. You came back, Tyler said, his voice muffled against Keanu's jacket. I said I would, Keanu replied, his hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. You're going to be okay now. One of the officers approached, a woman with a kind but serious expression. We'll take it from here, she said. We'll get them back to their families. Keanu nodded, his gaze lingering on Tyler. Make sure he's safe. The officer smiled. We will. You've done enough. Keanu stepped back as Tyler was guided toward a police car. The boy looked back over his shoulder, his expression a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Keanu raised a hand in a silent goodbye, watching as the car pulled away. The sun was fully up now, casting warm light across the town. Keanu stood in the parking lot for a moment, taking it all in. The fight with the copper vultures was over, but he knew there would always be more battles to face. The world was full of people who needed someone to stand up for them, and as long as he had the strength, he would be that someone. He climbed onto his motorcycle, the engine growling to life beneath him. As he rode out of Harper's Rest, the wind whipping past him, he felt a sense of peace. The road stretched out before him, endless and full of possibilities. For Keanu, the journey was never really over, but for Tyler and the other children, it was a new beginning, and that was enough. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Share this video with your friends. Let it inspire them too. And of course, check out our channel for more videos. See you soon.